Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With us today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to have you with us today.
Good morning, Dr. Paul. How are you this morning? As usual, yes.
And this is a special day because we have a special guest.
Yes.
It's a friend that I've had a long time, but I haven't seen him for a long time, and we crossed paths, with libertarian ideas and libertarian discussions a long time ago, and we attended frequently to Doug Casey's Era Society up in the mountains, and we got to talk a lot, and he had his newsletter back then. So, Rick, as you recall, I'm sure, that we were doing things back then, but I want to welcome you to the program today because we've been looking forward to this.
Well, thank you, Ron. And I was really looking forward to this, too. This is really great. I would like to say to the audience that I admire you so much because I don't think there's, and this is literally true, I don't think there's anybody else in the United States who has worked as hard at reviving the system of liberty as you have. And that is, I'm not exaggerating. I don't know anybody, and I've known a lot of people in the liberty movement, and nobody has done as much as you have. And I give you my personal thanks. I admire you, and I sure do appreciate everything you've done.
Well, I think that is very nice, but sometimes I feel a little bit embarrassed about it. But no, it is good. But I was going to mention to our audience that we understood each other philosophically and in a business sense and in a social sense, because I had a newsletter during the time. I was in Congress, for about 6-7 years. And then I said, I'm going back to medicine. I don't know if I like this place up in Washington. And so I went back to practicing medicine and had a newsletter, and it was a gold newsletter, and you knew about it. Matter of fact, you had your letter going, and to me, it was remarkable because you actually recommended our company to look at it and to look into the gold issue, and it wasn't like. As a matter of fact, I believe you probably still have the same principle. You'll make recommendations, but to make them more authentic, you don't get reimbursed. It wasn't like I was paying you to say this, and that's why it meant so much. But that doesn't happen that often. But I know you're very much involved in principle. But we have a lot of things going on. Daniel worked for me a good many years. How many, Daniel? 10, 15?
20?
Oh,
22?
Could be 20. He came as soon as 9/11 happened. He says, "Boy, I got to get in there and help Ron Paul. He's going to have problems."
Yeah.
No, he's been in charge of the research on foreign policy, and it's been very, very helpful. And he has spent some time in Europe, and he has a lot of experience there. But I think it's fascinating what you have done. And when I look at my meager attempt at writing, I think, holy man, just look at what Rick Maybury does. Oh, boy, you have a lot of books. You have your own library. And and before we close, we want to make sure everybody knows how to get in contact with you and also find out where those books are. And I think originally when we were communicating here in the last several weeks, are you starting a new newsletter, or are we just going to be talking about the early warning report?
Just the early warning report. I've been publishing that for 32 years, and that's my main outreach vehicle, the main way to influence people.
Right, and you had a few correct warnings, and that's been great. Matter of fact, a lot of them. But excitement comes and goes. I would say the area of the world that you spent your most time writing about, and Chaostan, that of course is a fascinating title. Why don't you just describe that, because it is your specialty, and that's what you're identified with. How you picked that name, and what does it include, and how much of the changes going on there that changes these boundaries in your land you call Chaostan?
Okay, Chaostan means Well, in Asia, the word "stan" means the land of. So Chaostan means the land of chaos, and I call that the area from East Europe to the Pacific, and from the North Pole down to the southern tip of Africa. So you got Africa, East Europe, and Asia, or Chaostan. Now, the reason I picked that word is because that area has been just a sea of blood and destruction and hatred since the beginning of history. There are thousands of ethnic groups and tribes and nations that have been fighting each other there in that area, Chaostan, for thousands of years. It goes actually back about, that we know of, 11,000 years of war. So the question is, why? What is so violent? Why the violence of that area? And the answer is that after the American Revolution, which was, the date for that was 1776. After the American Revolution was over, Americans probably erected the most libertarian society the world has ever seen. That we use the system of liberty. Liberty isn't a condition, it's a system. And Americans used that system of liberty and very quickly created the most advanced, the most progressive society in the history of the world. The rate of progress in America was astounding. And the people in other parts of the world saw that progress, and they wanted that for themselves. And these revolutions broke out all over the place, and a lot of countries did move in the direction of the system of liberty. But then, late in the 1800s, socialism came along and became the hot new fad, and lots of people jumped on that, especially intellectuals. And they took over the schools and colleges and started teaching socialism, and they killed the spread of the system of liberty. And the area that never got the system of liberty was Chaostan.
Right. You know, go ahead, finish.
I'm sorry.
Okay. I'm sorry I interrupted, but I think of Chaostan, and it's a little bit incorrect because what you just outlined, that's a big area,
Yeah.
Africa and everything. I generally thought of it more, in the Muslim Arab world of today in the Middle East, and which it is included, and it is a hotbed. But how does that division, to talk about how you describe how the Muslim system has been, charged with a lot of things, and they have had suffered persecution. How do you talk about Russia now and Ukraine? Is that part of it? Is there an Arab influence, or is there? We certainly have chaos there, so you must include in that. But it would be a little bit different than what Bush was doing in the Middle East of a few decades ago.
Yeah, I see Russia and Ukraine as a kind of a purist revival of what Chaostan really is. These people hate each other, and they've been going at each other for a long time. And when you look at the Muslim part of it, which is south of Ukraine, in those wars that have gone on there, those are to a very large extent due to the federal government's interventions in that part of the world, especially in Iran. Supporting the Shah of Iran was one of the most stupid things Washington ever did, and that has, in a kind of a domino effect, has led to these wars that involve Americans in the Muslim world. So that's a really strong American influence that has blown up the Muslim world, starting with the Shah of Iran. But I think that with Ukraine and Russia That's more the actual natural condition of Chaostan. That's just what these people do because they don't have an alternative. They have no background in the system of liberty. They don't know, what to do. At bottom, all countries have really just three choices. You can have liberty, or tyranny, or chaos. There's only those three possibilities, and Chaostan is chaos, and it always has been, and it's going to be until those people begin to learn the system of liberty.
Okay. Daniel, I believe, has a question for you.
Yeah, Rick, in your latest newsletter, you talk about what you call the river of weapons flowing from the U.S., from Washington, from the military industrial complex in the U.S. to Ukraine to fight this war with Russia. We know from today a report by CNN's Natasha Bertrand, who you could really call a mouthpiece for the administration. She points out that they basically know it by now in Washington that Ukraine is not going to get these territories back. It's not going to happen. Yet, we hear from the NATO summit this week that we will continue to spend as much as necessary, as long as necessary, to prop this up. Between the U.S. and Europe, we've put in $100 billion into this little scheme. And Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, said, "Well, that's fine and dandy, but I also need $7 billion a month to pay all my to pay all the wages here." Kind of reminds you of when your teenage son he wants to borrow your car and wants to take the new one instead of the old one.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So I mean, as Dr. Paul would say, a few billion here, a few billion there. This starts to add up. How do you see this commitment to financing this insane situation? How do you see it affecting us? I mean, the economy. What have you?
Primarily, I think it's one more incentive for the federal government to go crazy or crazier printing money. The American people are, I think, pretty close to a serious tax rebellion, and it could actually be a violent one. I don't know. But, in my estimation, about half of the population is really, really ticked off at the federal government, and they're not going to tolerate a lot more tax. So as the government gets deeper into these wars and pours American tax money into those wars, how's it going to pay for it? It's going to be by printing money. So we've already got a serious inflation started here. And I think that this insane intervention in Chaostan is just going to make it a lot worse.
The spread. Did you have a follow-up, Daniel?
No, I'll have some later.
Oh, okay. The problems that we have, obviously, expressing it in terms of chaos is not too difficult. But it seems like in the last few years, even though it was smoldering here probably closer to 100 years, and that is what has evolved and is known now as wokeism, and what is happening. And I see what's happening right now is a collusion between big business and big government, and that we're moving rapidly, toward more of a fascist state or corporatist state. And this, I guess, it wouldn't be difficult to fall. We wouldn't have trouble figuring out, well, is it the tyrants that are doing this? Is it the people who believe in liberty? No, not the people who believe in liberty, because that's who's being attacked. But it looks like the winner is going to be chaos anyway. But mention a little bit about us, how you see this wokeism movement and how this fits into your scenario.
I don't think I'm familiar with the term ropeism. What is that?
It's the wokeism is the cultural Marxist, the cancel culture.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, okay, wokeism. All right, got it. Yeah, I mean, to me, wokeism is the logical outcome of having government in control of the schools. The schools have been almost totally taken over by socialists, and that's been the case since the 1920s. And when kids go through school, the parents are not told, we're going to give your kid a socialist mentality. That's never been disclosed, and so the teachers are products of the school system, and they have socialist mentalities, and they don't even know it. They can't even identify it. Nobody will ever disclose it to them, and they teach these socialist lessons, and the main lesson is that the solution to every problem is more government. And practically the whole population has been taught that, and fortunately millions are waking up and realizing they were lied to when they were in school. But an awful lot of the population has bought into that whole thing. And it's the old thing about, political power corrupts the morals and the judgment. I write that lots of times, all the time. And so they keep growing the government, so the government's power keeps increasing, and the government's ability to corrupt everybody keeps increasing, because political power is an evil, evil thing. All you have to do is read the works of the American founders back there in the 1776 area, and they were really clear that they were scared to death of political power, and they were going to try to set up a system that would neutralize it as much as possible. And that lasted for, maybe 100 years or so, and then the socialists took over, and here we are now. So we've got a lot of chaos in the United States, and I would, when we're talking about big corporations being in bed with the government, Ayn Rand made a very good case in Atlas Shrugged that big corporations don't have any choice. They are big targets. They can't hide. And so if they don't get the government on their side, they're going to be targets of the government. They've only got those two choices. They're going to climb into bed with the government, or they're going to be victims of the government. And we're all starting to get into that situation now, where the whole country is really facing that kind of a dilemma. And I think America is in a crisis situation here that hasn't really been recognized yet, but we are pretty close, I think, to another revolution.
Yeah, I like how you point to the public school system as an incubator for this wokeism and the cultural rot that we have. It only took a few generations to go from, the odd teacher here or there to now third and fourth generation have gone through the system, taking their kids to drag queen story hour, right? So this shows how this takes hold. But you write a lot about libertarianism. You're a great proponent of it, and we're in a situation now, and Dr. Paul talks a lot about this. But we're witnessing, as you say, economic collapse, the war on speech, the rise of the surveillance state, the national security state, the wokeists, who are basically authoritarians. The mainstream media loves to say, well, there was a libertarian moment. It happened around Ron Paul's campaigns, but that's all over. We don't want to talk about it now. But Dr. Paul would say this is our greatest opportunity now to see the failure of everything they constructed up until this point. So my question to you would be, do you see this as a moment of our greatest opportunity, and how do you think we can take advantage of it to push now the ideas of liberty?
Incidentally, Daniel, you're very good at this. Let's see. I think the biggest advantage here is one that's actually kind of erupted spontaneously in maybe half the population, and that is they are beginning to recognize that the enemy is primarily the federal government, and they're sick of it. That's I mean, it's really amazing when I talk to people. They really they think of the federal government and they want to get sick. And one of the things that I hope is happening is that they are beginning to differentiate between the government and the country.
Yeah.
And that's something I press press on all the time. The country and the government are not the same thing. They are very, very loyal to America, but they have almost completely lost their loyalty to the government.
Which is good. Rick, in my campaigning, I came across a lot of challenges in various areas, but one has always been in the foreign policy, because the conservative Republicans obviously are usually very much more hawkish than the libertarians. And the tool that they used, and the left uses it too, because they want to, challenge you, because there's so many special interests that depends on the military-industrial complex. So they claimed that, Ron Paul and those other people and the libertarians, we can't talk to them because they are isolationists. They don't want to deal with the world. And I've been fussing with that, and I think every once in a while, I think I get a little bit of opening for that. That people are starting to use the word. It isn't isolation; it's non-intervention, and does the opposite of that. It makes us less isolated. The world, to me, is isolated now because of that, and yet this is happening every single day with the judicial system, the FBI. They always flip it. If they're doing something wrong, they're blaming the other side for doing it. It sort of reminds me of what I told Daniel and others when they come to work for me. They said, your job is going to not be too difficult. I want you to check this legislation that's coming up, but you probably won't have to read more than the title, because the title is always wonderful, and you can just say, well, they're going to do the opposite. So have you come across any discussion or thought about isolationism versus non-intervention being quite a bit different?
Oh, yes. And I'm speaking from experience here. When I was in the Air Force, I was in the 605th Air Commando Squadron, and I was stationed in Central America, and I was in 3 wars there. And it wasn't until many, many, many years later that I started looking at what I had been doing there, because they don't tell you the truth when you're in the military. They just give you some story that leads you to think that you're doing something valuable here. And what I found was that I was down there training the troops of dictators who were massacring innocent people, and had enabled or had found a way to get support from Washington, because these people in Washington who spend the money, they got no understanding at all of what the federal government is doing in other countries. And what I found was, I was helping people, like, for instance, General Rios Montt, who years later was convicted of war crimes and genocide. I was doing that. I was helping train his troops. And I'm still, when I start talking about it, I get enraged about it, because I thought we were protecting America. We were doing something that was good for America. But instead, these foreign dictators, they get influence in the U.S. Congress, and they wind up getting, or State Department, and they wind up getting subsidized. We Americans are subsidizing their tyranny, helping them massacre innocent people. Again, I was in 3 wars doing that, and nearly got killed 5 times for nothing. It's just, you have to have been there to understand what is so insane about American foreign policy. This, remember, Secretary of State Madeleine Albright, making this statement: if we have to use force, that is because we are America. We are the indispensable nation. We stand tall. We see farther into the future. And that's what these foreign policy people, in Washington do. They think they are some kind of gods who know what's good
Right.
for the rest of the world, and that we should intervene in the rest of the world. Go ahead.
Okay, no, Daniel has another question, but I want to make a quick comment on this. I think you could write an update on War is a Racket, Smedley Butler's book, since you were in South America and knew it firsthand again in the modern day.
Yeah.
But that was an eye opener for me on his booklet. But Daniel, you have another.
Well, I was just going to say, I was also thinking about Perkins' The Confessions of an Economic Hitman. That sounds a lot like what Rick was involved in as well. But we want to get out the name. Richard J. Maybury's U.S. and World Early Warning Report is the name of the newsletter. We're looking at the most recent copy of it right now, and we'll hold it up. There's a lot of great stuff in here, Rick, and I like this, one of your last pieces. I just like the headline so much. Protect your emotions against the flood of bad news. And we tend to get, I especially, Dr. Paul is always upbeat, but I tend to get, down about all this stuff. And I just read this piece, and it's great. And it reminded me, because at the end of that little short piece in your latest newsletter, you pointed out something that we should talk about, which are your Uncle Eric books. And I remembered now the title, Whatever Happened to Penny Candy, and it reminded me of the homeschool bookstore we go to in Houston. We've homeschooled our kids all along, and there's a great shelf of books, and that is one of them, and your other books are there, and all of these anti-state books are there in the homeschool bookstore in Houston, of all places. So it is having a great impact, the work that you've done in this area.
Well, thank you. Yeah, that's really great to hear. I appreciate that, and I hear that pretty often these days, which is what makes me a lot more optimistic about America's future than I used to be. The message of the need to restore the system of liberty is so important, and it is starting to spread, and that's why those Uncle Eric books are so popular. We don't do any conventional marketing with those. They spread by word of mouth. And I think there's been more than 700,000 that have been sold, and the secondary readership on them has to be at least 3, maybe 4, because they are used within families, and then they're passed on to other people. So we know for a fact that we're having a big effect. Maybe not a big enough effect, but more than what was going on before Uncle Eric was invented. I think, and I appreciate you acknowledging that, Daniel. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks for writing.
And Rick, this is a time I want to ask you to make sure the viewers are paying attention to know how to find these books, and what do they do, and do you run a website on a daily basis, something that you want to recommend, or how should they reach you? And I'm sure it's on the internet someplace, but let them know exactly what they can do to follow up with all your activities and be able to buy your literature.
Yeah, very good. Thank you. For the newsletter, it's very simple. EWRoffer.com. It's the newsletter's name is Early Warning Report, so it's EWRoffer.com. And then for the general website that will tell you a lot more about me and the other stuff that's available, that's earlywarningreport.com.
Very good. That should be easy to remember.
Easy to remember, yeah. Great.
So have a.
No, I just want to express my appreciation for having this conversation with Rick. It's been really fascinating, Dr. Paul.
Very good. No, Rick, it's been great. It means that we ought to get together more often, but I don't know. They've handicapped my liberty because I have personally responded, but I don't fly commercial anymore. I had enough of it. And of course, going back and forth to Washington, now I'm starting to have a little guilt feeling. Well, why did I put up with so much even before the COVID nonsense? They were poking and prodding me and would upset me. Daniel has had a few experiences like that too. It's just terrible. It's easy to say, well, just a little bit, and we put up with it. But just so that we know what the target is, and you've done a great job on that, and the target, and that, the difference between tyranny and liberty is very precise, and if you don't, the other option is what we have, and that is chaos. So that's what we're looking for. But we certainly appreciate you being with us today.
Oh, thank you, Ron. And again, I thank you so much personally for the work you're doing. We're all here fighting the same fight, and it's great to be back in touch with you again.
Very, very good. Let's stay in touch. And I want to thank our viewers for tuning in today. Please return to the Liberty Report soon.